This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
I think of myself as an accidental activist. I wanted to find my purpose. Globally, 1/3 of all food is going to waste, and it's inhumane. There are people who could eat this food. What I care about most is making sure that hungry people get surplus food. First, I want to fix it here, and then we'll take it to the world. I was committed to starting a food rescue organisation.
Can I please welcome our fearless and occasionally fearsome leader, Ronni Kahn.
I tried not to cry.
It breaks my heart to do this.
Marla,
Yes.
Don't look too closely.
It could be going to hungry people.
I've done this because government hasn't. They have completely let the people of Australia down. Being a change maker involves ruffling many feathers. I'm filming.
Everyone's concerned about the liability.
There's going to be a little bit of carnage on the way.
You are our partner and you're about to screw us.
The government stuff really does frustrate.
I was ambushed on national TV. And I looked like an idiot because I didn't say what I really thought. There are millions of kids that don't have food. It is moving beyond words. I pitched an idea to get some money, and then you turn it into a real thing.
Ronnie's got one of the biggest days of her life in the UK with Jamie. Camilla's the patron.
We should keep reminding ourselves that great change is happening.
It's so addictive when you can see that you can make a difference. It is time to disrupt. I will continue to fight this battle. This will be my life's work. I could never have known what this journey that I was embarking on then would lead me to. There's only one way we're going to change it, and it's one person at a time.
The purpose of this lecture series is to promote the fundamental rights and freedoms of individuals and the value of truth and reconciliation in life and public affairs. The session tonight is being recorded, and a video will be available on the Hawke Centre website later this week. We do encourage you to bring this to the attention of your friends and colleagues who could not be here tonight. And to avoid interruptions, may I ask that you please switch your phones to silent, and as I'm usually one of the offenders myself, just make sure that I'm off. However, please do feel free to follow the Twitter conversation at the Hawke Centre. Now, I remember being told as a child back in Dublin, where this month was very dark and cold and dreary, to eat everything on my plate because somewhere else on the planet a child was starving. I'm sure many of you were told the same thing, and I always thought it was a kind of a ruse to get me to eat things I didn't want to eat, but it wasn't. It's because it's a reality. According to the federal government, we waste more than 5.3 million tonnes of edible food every year. That causes not only a loss of food, but it's also a $20 billion loss to the Australian economy. It's a tragic loss to the more than 3.5 million hungry Australians who experience food insecurity every year, and the 710,000 people in this country who rely on food relief every single month. Tonight's guest speaker ran a successful event management company and saw firsthand how much food the hospitality industry wastes. She began a food rescue charity with a simple ethos: to rescue that wasted food and bring meals to those in need. There were a few hurdles, of course, to overcome: legislative barriers surrounding perishables and leftovers, for examples. But she lobbied to change the law to make it easier for restaurants and supermarkets, catering companies and the hospitality industry to donate their leftover food. 14 years after she began her rescue mission with a single food truck, Ronni Kahn and her charity Oz Harvest now work with over 3,000 food donors to deliver millions of meals to more than 1,000 charities nationwide. No longer a small Sydney charity, Oz Harvest now operates in New Zealand, in South Africa, and the United Kingdom, and through food rescue partners in Peru and in Italy as well. Sydney now has Australia's first food rescue supermarket, a pop-up collaboration with the Youth Shelter Housing Project. The supermarket is stocked with rescued food and operates on the take what you can, give if you can model. Oz Harvest has an educational side called NEST, Nutritional Educational Sustenance Training, which holds classes in budgeting for food, making food healthier eating choices, and planning nutritional low-end and low-cost meals. So far, Ronni hasn't eliminated world hunger, but she and the charity that she has founded will play a role in advancing that goal. Until that time, for tonight, she's more likely to make you think about your own refrigerator, your own shopping habits, and the amount of food that you waste. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me in welcoming the social enterprise leader, tonight's speaker, the founder of Oz Harvest, Ronni Kahn.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. And I too would like to acknowledge the Ghana people on whose land we meet tonight and pay my deep respects to their elders past and present. It is beyond an honor, and I will get a little emotional for me, to be doing the centenary oration of Mandela's birth and life. Given that I was born in South Africa, I have a huge affiliation and connection with, as far as I'm concerned, without doubt, the world's greatest leader, the world's greatest human being. Any man, and I just will read it so that I get it right. Any man that can say this, and we do know of so many people who've been wronged, but any man who can say, as I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I would still be in prison and live the rest of his life through the virtues of Ubuntu, compassion, and the humanity of those values. Any man, as far as I'm concerned, is therefore my hero. And this one is my hero. So I do feel incredibly grateful to share my story tonight under the shadow of that legend. Given that I was galvanized to action, actually not very far from Mandela's home in Soweto, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So let me just share with you that at no point in my life, growing up, did I ever aspire to be a charity leader, nor did I ever aspire to be a social entrepreneur, nor did I ever aspire to be a true leader or any of the other extraordinary names that I sometimes get called. I was a very, and still am, just a very concerned, but as a child, just a very spoiled and ordinary little girl, growing up under the shadow, or should I say, under the deep, dark cloud of apartheid. And I don't think that anyone who has not experienced that or seen some of those symbols firsthand, or looked at films about apartheid, can understand how evil and how wrong it really was. And I was incredibly fortunate that my parents lived by values that they taught us that that was wrong. They were not brave and courageous enough to fight that. And this week I had an incredible experience of meeting with the son of one of the people alongside Mandela who escaped being at Rivonia on the day that Mandela was, and Lily's Leaf was raided. And for those of you who don't know, the ANC had a headquarters that looked like a home, that was a farm, that was a little bit outside of Johannesburg, that that's where people would go and meet. The ANC, the Underground, Bram Fischer, all of the group. And on a particular day, they were raided. And I met the son of Harold Walpe, Nicholas Walpe, who was in Australia this week, talking at a film called An Act of Defiance. And I urge any of you, if there's a film festival that this film is on, to go and see it. Even though the least successful character, the least successful portrayal in the film is Mandela, but it is that story, and it is just so horrifying and brought the evil and reality of apartheid again back to me. So picture growing up in a South Africa where more than two-thirds, three-quarters of the population completely had no rights. And because I was born fortunate to white parents, I had everything accorded to me. And as I say, my parents had the moral, and it's really hard to explain, because by virtue of the fact of living white in South Africa during apartheid, you were a colluder. There's just absolutely no doubt about it. But they did the best they could. Their parents had fled and immigrated from Eastern Europe during the Holocaust, or pre-Holocaust, and they found themselves born in South Africa, and then apartheid happened. I'm not excusing them in any way. We had many discussions as adults about what that must have been like. But growing up, somebody the other day said to me, you know, you've been so lucky. You were just in the right place at the right time with Oz Harvest. And you know what? That's not true. I made a conscious choice to start Oz Harvest, but I was fortunate and lucky to be born to these parents who put me in a very liberal school, who insisted that we understand that the system was not right. That was luck. And then I finished school and had the choice of staying in South Africa or not. And I left. I left because I felt that I would not be useful, that I would fight the system, that I'd probably land up in jail, but left for this whole range of reasons, and lived in Israel for 18 years. Now, 18 years is the land of socialism. I once again lived on a kibbutz, which the only reason I share this is because it's about values. And over the last 14 years, since I started Oz Harvest, since I find myself in this place of having the extreme privilege to stand up and sometimes share some of my story, and I'm still in awe that anyone wants to hear it, but that's besides the point. And I realize how important it is as a parent. And so I'm dropping this in, but how important it is as a parent to live and be true and live with integrity with your morals and your values. Because subliminally, I absorbed those without ever understanding or knowing that I did. Then I went and lived on a kibbutz. Now, often when I talk, and especially in an audience in Australia that is mixed ages, I will see people nodding because there was a huge volunteer movement that went to spend time on a kibbutz. And so people nod as understanding. But I lived on kibbutz and always thought I should have been a volunteer and not a member, because the volunteers had much more fun than the members. But there's nothing I regret about that period other than realizing that as an independent, very headstrong individual, I wasn't so good at living in a fully socialist system where I was told what to do and when to do it because it was good for the society. And so I realized that that was working and had worked so well for 80 years that I couldn't change that, so it was time to leave. And I actually landed in the land of milk and honey when I came to Australia. It was the land of opportunity. I came here with not very much material wealth, 2 kids, and a huge intention to make a go of it, And you know, in this country, if you put your head down and your butt up, no, the other way around. Your butt down and your head up, you can work really hard and you can succeed. And I keep thinking about the fact that living in South Africa, all those people, the millions of people that I saw every day, who it didn't matter what aspirations they had, those aspirations had absolutely no chance of fulfillment. And that the work that Mandela and the ANC did, and the struggle, and how they gave up their lives for that was just extraordinary. And there's absolutely no doubt that the fact that I didn't do anything in South Africa was part of what drove me to make a difference here in this new land that I'd chosen to live in. But again, I get a little bit ahead of myself, because when I came, all I wanted was security for my children, a roof over my head, and food on my table. And that's what I did. I worked hard. And I can clearly recall buying the very first house that we had scrimped and saved to buy. And you can tell how long ago it is, because we, together with a mortgage, with that whatever we could borrow, we could buy a house for $170,000. It was still going to be the bank's house, but it felt like it was going to be ours. But the point is, when I went to buy that house, every house I saw, and the ones I really wanted, was $250,000. A few years later, we'd done a little bit better, and we went out to buy the next house. And now we had $350,000. But the funny thing is, the house I really wanted was $480,000. And so it went on until 15 years ago, I reached a point in my life that actually I had a roof over my head. I had food on my table and 2 wonderful, healthy, beautiful sons. And I thought, wow, how many rooms can I actually be in at the same time? I won't go into jewelry, because clearly one can wear a lot of jewelry. But I started questioning my existence, the very purpose, the values that I'd lived in, the leaders that I aspired to be like at some point. And I was running an event company, a very successful little boutique event company. And the one thing that was common at every one of my events was food. Food is about sharing. Food is about caring. Food is about dignity. Food is about showing success. For my clients, the best way that I could show that they were successful was have abundant food. And my tables groaned. And one of the other measures of success was that there was a lot of food left over at the end of our events. We could say, and I'm sure many of you have been to an event, and you've stood over there and the food came there. And then you moved over there where you thought the waiter was and the food went there. Well, nobody ever left my event and had to go to Macca's on the way home. The tables groaned, there was food left over. And I started reaching a point that was not okay. So quite honestly, 15 years ago, there was no awareness around zero waste. There was no awareness of the connection between food and people in need in such a way. So I started making sure that when I could, in my own van, but actually by then I had a nice red sports car. And I'd sometimes put the food in my little red sports car, and I'd rock up to the one place that I knew, which was the Matthew Talbot home in Sydney, which is right behind the Porsche and the Ferrari dealers on William Street. And driving up at all hours of the night, there would be all shapes and shades of men. And it was quite confronting getting out of my car and delivering food. And so I started thinking about, what if I have this problem? I have this food. What if what if I could take that food in a more organized way? And I looked around, and there was no one who was going to help me do that. And I still don't really know why I decided that I was the privileged, gifted, lucky person to decide that if that doesn't exist, then maybe I should create it. I had no idea of what that would lead to, nor did I understand then that $20 billion worth of good food was going to waste. Nor did I understand then that in Australia today, then it was probably like 2 million people, but today, as David alluded, actually the latest figures that came out of the census 2 weeks ago on World Food Day are that 4 million people in Australia go hungry in this abundant, extraordinary country. So my initial thoughts were, I know that there's food, I've got food. What if I connected with people in need? I guess we're almost on 100 million meals that we will have donated. So I guess it wasn't such a bad idea. But I didn't just wake up and say, today I'm going to start a charity. I did think about it. I thought about what it could look like. I thought about how to do that. And then decided to go and visit my very close and wonderful friend in South Africa, Selma Brody, who I hadn't seen for years because I had not been back to South Africa. I had not been back since Mandela had been released. I had not seen the new South Africa. I also did not know the kind of work that she'd done. I knew she'd been an activist and a change maker, but I didn't know the details. She's the kind of person that you could call once a year and it was as if we'd been together all our lives. And I called and said, you know what? I'm just thinking about a few things. I'm going to come and take a little break, and I'm coming to South Africa for a week. She said, wonderful. She said, I've got a busy schedule. She said, but you'll come with me to Soweto. Now, hearing those words to me were petrifying. When I lived in South Africa, no white person could go to Soweto. And so I had to psych myself up to thinking about, wow, this really was a new South Africa I was going back to. And I arrived, and it was extraordinary to see the difference between the South Africa I had left and the South Africa that existed. And Selma said to me, come, we're going to Soweto. And with a beating heart, I got into that car with her, filled with trepidation and excitement. But as we drove into Soweto, Selma said to me in a very quiet voice, just as if everybody has this. She said, oh, and by the way, I was responsible for electricity in Soweto. My heart stopped. The hairs on my arms stood up. So, Soweto was a city of 4 million people, a bustling, hustling shanty town. And all I could think of was, what does it feel like to know you've made that kind of difference to that many people? Now, we were going into Soweto because Selma's a radiologist and a doctor and a change maker and an entrepreneur. And she had started running classes to teach AIDS to women in suburbs. So she'd teach women because women share information and women talk. And they would share that information with their neighbors. And she had found different people in all different parts of Soweto. By the time we got to the first clinic that she had set up, I knew that my life would never be the same again. And that I was going to start a food rescue organization. I arrived back in Australia like a woman possessed. But quite honestly, that has never changed. Because I came back and said, I'm going to start a food rescue organization. And whoever I told, it was a little bit like I was the Pied Piper. Although when I think of the story of the Pied Piper, that's not a great story. But I had people saying, yes, what can we do? And of course, we did have people who said, no, that doesn't sound like a good idea. It'll never work. You'll never make it. To those people, I said, just mind out of my way. To the rest, I said, come on board and help me to do what it is that I think could be a good idea and could make a significant difference. So 14 years ago, people were not talking about waste. But David, as you said, when I grew up, my parents told me, now remember, I brought up in South Africa, where today 11 million people go to bed hungry every night and wake up without breakfast every morning. My parents told me that there were people starving in China. In South Africa, that's what people told their children. There were people starving in China. I could have taken my peas outside my front door. So as you heard it, that is one of the fundamental and has become a universal truth for me, that everybody at some point knows that good food should not go to waste. I didn't have to teach anybody that. I've had to change a lot of other things along the way. But that fundamental core reason is why Oz Harvest is as successful as it is. And that is because we all know that good food should not go to waste. I'm not even talking about the fact that to grow an orange or a banana, it takes water, it takes fuel, it takes energy, and it's labor. And it isn't the 60 cents or the dollar every time we throw one of those away. It is way more. And in fact, probably most of you might not like what I'm about to say, but our food is too cheap. Our food really, if we valued it the way we should value our food, it should cost us a lot more. And maybe we'd treat it better if we paid much more for it. Because as a society, and because you are all in this room, I know that you are the converted, and I am sharing with you facts that belong outside of this space. But that as a society, we have become a society of consumption. We want to walk into a supermarket or a market or a store or a convenience store. They're not called convenience stores for nothing, and they're open from 24 hours, and we can get everything at any time. And so we just turf out when we don't. Is that me ringing? No. Okay. I suddenly panicked. And so we don't value food the way we should. But 15 years ago, when I decided to start Oz Harvest, it was a bit of a lone voice other than consumers, friends, people who understood that this was a very important thing. That has changed over the last 14 years. And significantly, but not significantly enough. Globally, this is a universal problem we have. It is a universal challenge. The beautiful thing is, every single one of us is part of the solution. So I'll touch on that in a little while. But that visit was so fundamental for me because in the shadow of Mandela, in the shadow of a childhood that I'd had, it was now time for me to give back to my new adopted home. And every day, I'm so grateful for the fact that I did that, because it has and continues to make a difference. And the beautiful thing is, I say that I am a magnet for magnificent people, because nobody can do anything on their own. Each and every one of us has the power to make change, but we can't do it alone. And I now have an extraordinary team of people around me who support and grow and help us to shift and change this enormous challenge that we have. That little clip that you saw in the film that is in the film. So for the last 3 years, I was followed by a film crew. They came to me and said, we're going to make a film on food waste, and for me, any information around food waste is hugely important. And so I said, yes, of course. At some point during the filming, they said, we think the film needs a protagonist. I said, okay, good, go find one. They said, we think we found one. So I had no intention of this film ever coming to light or being my story, but it turns out that it is somewhat my story. But I mention that because in 2015 is when they started filming me. And in 2015 is when I took a bunch of my colleagues and a bunch of wonderful food that was rescued, that we turned into gourmet food to Canberra, to Parliament House, to Minister Greg Hunt, who was there now Environment Minister, to Mark Baker, who was the Shadow Minister, to Larissa Waters, who was the Greens, and fed them a meal from rescued food and got our government to commit to halving food waste. Then by 2025, because although the UN was starting to talk about halving food by 2030, I thought Australia could do it quicker, and we could do it by 2025. Anyway, I got tripartisan support. It was a wonderful day and very exciting. By a year later, when nothing had happened, I formed a Zero Food Waste Alliance and brought everyone from the supply chain into a couple of forums, including government, Farmers Federation, Coles, Woolworths, Aldi, all the suppliers, all the players. And we started having conversations. At the same time, we'd been looking at what was happening globally, what was happening around the world to combat food waste and to start shifting and changing the conversation. And luckily, sorry, I'm just going to... As part of that forum, the representatives who were there from government went back, and I think they kind of said, I think we need to do a little more. And in 2017, our new Minister for the Environment, Josh Frydenberg, stood up and declared that Australia would halve food waste by 2030 in line with the UN commitment. We had already committed to doing that, but we committed again, which was really exciting, because that's a good thing to have double commitment and triple commitment, because now I was hoping that action would take place. And I must, well, I'll continue. Anyway, and Josh announced that in November 2017, we'd come together, and he invited a few hundred people to celebrate and launch the National Food Waste Strategy, which he called in November. And in the months leading up, we were working very closely with government. We were working very closely with an organization in the UK called RAP, who had started working with the UK government 10 years before to try to combat food waste, and we're doing really well and have done very well. So we're very good at not reinventing the wheel, and we kept wanting to make sure that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. What we need to do is learn and be as quick and agile and nimble as we can. Anyway, that day was a bit of a disappointment. In the lead up to that day, the department had asked us to share what it was going to take, how much it would cost to do the system, and what we'd learned from what was happening globally. And we had given them a line-by-line budget that, together, to get business on board, to get everyone on board, to start and kick off this program would take $30 million. Until business would kick in itself, and the savings, we're talking about a $20 billion problem. So to invest $30 million to solve a $20 billion problem Seems like a good investment to me. Anyway, on the day, and this was all being filmed because the film crew were just following me around wherever I was. And Josh stood up and announced a $1.2 million investment in this challenge. So that's why you saw that little clip that I was a little disappointed. And before he announced it, he came into me sitting in the room and said, Ronni, I want you at the press conference after I announce what I'm going to announce. And I said, am I going to be happy and comfortable with your announcement? He said, it's a start. Anyway, Josh and I are still good friends. We are, but that was all captured on film, so that was part of the film. But I am actually seriously proud to say that he hosted a screening of the film at Parliament House. And he didn't look so great in it, but he acknowledged and accepted that, and as we all do, that we do have to start somewhere. So in a way, you know, what I really wanted to share with you was how much I've learned in the last 14 years. And how fundamentally, when I started on this journey, as I'm 100% sure any other leader, you know, and again, if I think about the journey that Mandela took when he, you know, lost his father and was sent to school, and anyway, his journey is just such a well-documented one. I don't have to share that today, but that he was inspired by his Zulu and Xhosa forefathers to be the best he could be for his country. And in a way, what I realize is that it is my job to be the very best I can be, both for myself, for my 2 sons, for my grandchildren, and for this country. I wake up every single morning with gratitude. I want to share a little story. I was talking to 5,000 16-year-olds in the Sydney International Convention Centre. So the auditorium is humongous. You can't see anybody far out. And before I went and did the speech, I'm thinking, what am I going to say that is going to inspire 5,000 16-year-olds? Anyway, I just came on stage and just shared my story, and there was just this beautiful energy in the audience, and they had the opportunity for question and answer. And a kid in the way back in a hoodie, a 16-year-old boy in a hoodie, stands up and says, firstly, I want to thank you because I've had your food and it's supported me and got me to where I am at school today. He said, but my question for you is, could you tell me what happens when you have a bad day? So firstly, I thanked him for his courage in thanking me for food, and said how honored and privileged I felt that we'd been able to help him. And then I said, we all have a choice every single day of our lives. We have a choice to be happy, we have a choice to be sad, we have a choice to be angry, we have a choice to begrudge, we have a choice to give. And I said, and I have chosen that every day in my life, I'm going to give and I'm going to be happy. And this kid said, I think you fundamentally changed my life. Can I come down and have a hug? By which stage, I'm bawling. I think he's bawling. I jump off the stage. This is a huge stage at the stadium. We hug. And I was so excited, I just said, a kid shouts out, how do we contact you? And I said, ronnie.kahn@ozharvest.org. It didn't occur to me to say info@. Anyway, I got hundreds of emails, but you know how many said, I wish I could have had a hug. So my staff who are here will tell you that we pay in hugs. But seriously, I also wanted to share another little story about our free supermarket. So it was a dream of mine to open a free supermarket. And, you might say, what is a free supermarket? No such things exist. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Well, actually, at the Ozharvest supermarket, there is. Beautiful convergence of events. You need to tell me how my time is. Okay, because I have no idea when I'm talking about time. A property developer came to me and said, we've got a building, it was a motel, we're going to convert it into very zhuzhy apartments, but in the meanwhile, what could we do with it? There's a restaurant downstairs. We were thinking of perhaps using it to put vulnerable people in the period until it gets converted. I said, that's absolutely divine. Let's connect you, we'll do that. I said, I'll go and look. They said, would you run a restaurant downstairs if we put people there? I said, well, I'll need to see the space. And I go and look at the space, and it's the grubbiest, grossest, old Chinese restaurant that you've ever seen in your life. And I said, no. I said, if you gut it and clean it, I will, but nah, let's gut it and clean it. I said, what if we put in a free supermarket which would serve the people who are in the building, but could be really interesting? And she said, we love it, let's do it. And so we did. Now, I don't know very much about running a supermarket, and that became apparent very quickly. But I'll share with you that today we have seconded a supermarket manager from Woolworths, who runs it for us, and the rest of the staff are all volunteers, so it's very gorgeous. It's like a personal shopping experience. Because people now come from far and wide, and I'll share two stories about the supermarket, because I think they're very different and very beautiful. We opened the supermarket, and a woman arrives on the door with 2 children in tow. And I happen to be there, and she comes up to me and she says, I just want to tell you that my husband just lost his job. I don't normally do. And I just said, stop. I said, at this place, you don't have to tell anybody why you're here. Anybody can come here. So now let's go shopping. So I say, grab a basket. It's a bagless supermarket. If you don't come with your own bag, you can only take what you can carry. No bags. We go through the aisle. It's not that big, but it was just after Easter, and we'd been given piles of exquisite boxed cookies that were left over, perfectly beautiful, perfectly in date. We only collect food that's in date. And as we got to this pallet of these cookies, the kid grabs her coat and says, Mummy, I think this shop's too expensive for us. I just said, you know what? This is a very special shop. We can put 2 of these for each of you in your basket. And so we carried on. And at the end, when you've done all the aisle, instead of a cash register, there's just a big box that says, every dollar donated to Ozharvest allows us to deliver 2 meals. And this woman opened her wallet and took out $5 and said, look, kids, we have just allowed 10 meals to be delivered because of us. Bawling again. But last week, the phone went, and a guy, I've got 5 minutes. Okay, last week the phone went, and a guy said, is the supermarket going to be open on Wednesday? I need stuff for bolognese. We said, the supermarket is open on Wednesday. He said, but I'll only get there by 1. I've got to take 2 trains and 2 buses, and it's going to be very hard for me. We said, we will make sure that there is produce for you. Now, we never know what's in the supermarket. It's rescued. So there could be bolognese one day, and tomatoes and pasta, but there could be none. Anyway, there was, and we put it aside, and at 1 o'clock, this guy came, and one of my team went there because we wanted to get his story, to understand someone who's catching 2 trains and 2 buses, and it said it was going to be a real big deal for him to do this. Quite a young man, gorgeous, suffers from PTSD, said that it's just, he struggles to walk out of his house, but he knew about the supermarket. He'd heard me on the ABC on 1+1 and was inspired, and on that conversation I must have mentioned the supermarket, and that he really wanted to make bolognese and needed the ingredients. We'd put aside 7 bags of shopping for him. We took his photo. I was in the office and the phone goes, and this guy called and he said, I've got a special message for Ronni. Can you please tell her that I went to the supermarket and I got all this produce and they made me feel like a celebrity because they took my photo. So those are the kinds of things that I experience every single day of my life. And that is what a life of Ubuntu is, a life filled with values of compassion and humanity. And being brought up in South Africa, being brought up with a personal hero in Nelson Mandela, standing here today to honor his birth and his life is incredibly meaningful for me. So I thank you for the privilege of letting me talk today. Thank you.
You don't get to leave just yet. That's me paid for the evening anyway. Ronni, have a seat. We are going to, sometimes the stories that you hear in these lectures, you think, I just wish they would go on. And when Jack went like this, I thought, oh no, this is, so it's her fault. But we have got some more time to hear from Ronni, and what we'll do is we're going to have Q&A, and it falls to me to, that's why I have my glasses on, because last time I did this I couldn't see where the hands were. We're going to have a seat, and we'll take questions from the floor until I get told that it's time to wrap up, and it'll be Jacinta's fault again, and then we'll wrap up with a vote of thanks. So I'm just going to sit down here, and we've got some roving microphones, and the first hand gets the first question.
So the first thing I need to tell you, I'm so glad he's not asking me questions. I can't understand a word he says. I need a translator.
Says the South African, right?
Yeah.
We've got one just in the middle. Whoever gets the microphone wins.
Thank you, Ronni, for that. An inspiring story and, obviously so much good done from it. What do you think your next stage is in terms of rescuing food and the whole area?
Sure, thank you. So we've just launched and we're finishing a pilot of a digital platform to allow us to reach areas in regional and rural Australia that we could never reach with a fleet of yellow vans. So we have 57 yellow vans on the road, but we can't reach everywhere. So that's a huge new step for us. Our 4 pillars are rescue, educate, engage, and innovate. So for us, it's all about, we exist for one reason, and that is impact, and that is to do ourselves out of business. That is my goal. So it's to reach as many people as possible. But on the other hand, at the end of that film, you might have seen there was a Fight Food Waste campaign. We're launching a movement, and we're looking for food fighters. We want to teach 1,000 people and use the Cascade model and get them to teach and teach and teach. So we need people who want to join the super army, super force. So that is a big part of where we're going next. And lastly, if I'm going to do a plug, we've got a beautiful kids book. Well, we've got 2 kids education programs, but we have a kids book coming out at Christmas. It's a special edition, and it's the story of waste, and it's very beautiful. And if you want to know more about it, I'm happy to sell you some. Because every dollar allows Ozharvest to deliver 2 meals.
Just come down a few steps.
Thanks, Ronni. Obviously, the work OzHarvest does is fabulous. So looking at reducing some of the excess that can't be collected by OzHarvest or similar groups, and thinking about events, especially in the Australian climate where stuff might not be able to be rescued for heat reasons or just excesses. Can you see a way with your catering background in corporate boxes and things like that where they know that there's a set number of people to reduce the amount of over-catering so there's less in the first place?
Absolutely. So that's part of our education program. So on the one hand, we've been working with business. So we've been a B2B organisation, teaching business, 3,500, 4,000 businesses. We've made countless businesses much more efficient. So we're teaching business how to be more effective. But it's shifting behaviour is a very complex, very complicated thing. And that's really why with our Fight Food Waste movement, we've been working with universities, looking at human-centred design to understand what it takes for all of us to shift our behaviour. But I have also just started a new company, and it's called the For Purpose Co. And the purpose of the For Purpose Co., it's a startup, and it's a social, for good, for-profit business to help sustain OzHarvest. But what we're doing in that business is looking at food tech, agri-tech, waste tech, any solutions we can find that might minimize food waste and might help affect the distribution issues. But just so that you know, our vehicles are all refrigerated, our drivers are all trained in safe food handling, so we certainly do collect from corporate boxes and corporate events, etc. But we absolutely know that people need to serve less, but then we need to not judge a caterer or an event if you just get a smaller size portion or less food. And it's up to us. There's nobody else we can blame, us.
So we're going all the way up to the back.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can understand my accent because it's Southern African,
I heard
Zimbabwean.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to just raise with you was your earlier point about we need to price food in a way that reflects its true value. And I'm just intrigued at the moment, the supermarkets have this down, 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 and it encourages us to be careless with food. And I'm just wondering if that plays into how you're trying to change society.
Absolutely, but I'm putting it back on us. Supermarkets do that because we want cheap food. If we were, at every one of these conversations, I have people say, why don't the supermarkets stop doing this? Well, if we wrote to them, if we walked with our feet, if we didn't go there, or we said, we care about our dairy farmers, we're not going to have cheap milk, we will not buy it unless you put the right price. It's up to us. They're in business. They're made up of people, just like us. So we have to, I promise you that if you write a letter to, I happen to know that Brad Banducci, the CEO of Woolworths, answers any single letter that gets written to him. I just happen to know that because I tell people, complain, write, or say good or say bad. But it's the same with politicians, to be honest. If we lobbied our politicians about food waste, the reason Josh did not give us that money, not because he's a bad guy, he's an awesome guy, but there wasn't a political appetite for it. That's changing because our voices are getting louder. So if we were willing to pay more, then Coles and Woolworths would not be at war with down, down, down. But it's up to us. And it's not that we're going to go and say, give us more expensive food, but we have to be responsible shoppers.
It's down the front now.
I understand that what you tend to see in the shops is only a small percentage, and that is the most beautiful of all the food that's available. And I understand that that's because the Housewives of Australia want it that way. However,
the house people of Australia.
However, that must mean that not just at the supermarket, but all the way back through the food chain,
Absolutely.
back to the farms, you're going to have stuff that they won't send forward because they know it won't be accepted. Is that
That's what we
stuff you
collect.
want?
We
Yeah.
collect all along. So, for example, with our new For Purpose Co., our first little business is called Juice for Good. And we've piloted and we're launching it in New South Wales first. Sorry, because it's just closer and easier to manage. It will come here. It's called Juice for Good, and it's fresh orange juice vending machines. Instead of like water, it's fresh orange juice, but the oranges are all different shapes and sizes. So we're buying them direct from farmers. The produce they can't. But in supermarkets these days, there's, in Woolworths, there's the odd bunch. Imperfect, but it's being sold cheaper because we want it cheaper. It's insane. It costs exactly the same to grow an ugly orange as it does to grow a beautiful orange. So we shouldn't be paying less.
Rachel.
Thank you. What would you be doing differently if Josh Frydenberg did give you the 30 million that you're not doing now?
Awesome. Thank you for that question. So what I'd be doing is we'd be mobilizing business, because out of the $20 billion, $10 billion comes from households, $10 billion comes from business. Business stands to gain... I'm too excited and won't get the right statistic. So what we wanted with that 30 million was to create a voluntary agreement for business. So I'll tell you how it works. So for example, in the UK, Tesco committed to minimizing its food waste. Within 5 minutes, so did Sainsbury's, so did every single supermarket. So the 30 million was, on the one hand, to create an independent body that could manage and man an agreement, a voluntary agreement for business, on the one hand, and on the other, to run consumer campaign. So OzHarvest is the only organization in Australia and is the only one doing and running a national consumer campaign to halve food waste. So we've got an education campaign. If you go and look on the Fight Food Waste website, we have no funding to do that. We are doing that because it's fundamentally important and has to be done. That 30 million wouldn't have come to us. It would be in an independent body that would invest in building a national voluntary agreement. It would invest in education. I've got that. If you grab that, I want to quote Nelson Mandela. Can I just quote Nelson Mandela, please, in this space? That would be a good thing. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And all of our education programs, the Fight Food Waste campaign is an education program for each and every one of us. And what it would do, it would give business the incentive to then invest. It's going to take more than 30 million, but it's going to give business the incentive to invest. I'd be very happy to share in more detail with you where that would go. Thank you. Great question.
Yes. I might be missing something here, but I was wondering what would happen to the 4 million people who have experienced food insecurity this year if food prices did go up. It seems that we have a greater diversity between those that can afford food and those that can't. So my question is, if food was to go up and we paid the real price of food, what would happen to those people who are experiencing food insecurity? So OzHarvest commitment, thank you for that question, very valid. Under our 4 pillars, under that education piece, we educate consumers like us how not to waste food. But we have got programs to educate the organizations that we support, the individuals that we support in those organizations, how to live a sustainable life, how not to waste food, how to cook. So if someone had $8 instead of, and I have nothing against Macca's, but instead of going to Macca's and spending $8, if they bought bolognese
and made a spaghetti for their family. So we have an education program. Will we reach all 4 million? No, but we are certainly trying to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty. So for me, I must bring down food waste, and we must upskill the 4 million people so that they can live to their full potential. I don't want to perpetuate providing. We will never run out of food, so we will always have food to feed vulnerable people. But we must bring down that number. We must have less vulnerable people in this country. And the only thing that's going to change for them is education and the opportunity.
Thank you.
Now our microphone wranglers are waiting on a microphone. And you've got to go all the way up the back.
Just a quick one. Can you hear me or understand me?
I can.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm only saying that because of people. Quick one. Just sort of following on from what you're saying. There's two questions there. For example, organisations like food banks. So you sort of work in tandem with them. I'm just picking one out just because I've heard the name.
Yeah.
And as I say, with encouraging the education, I'm from the university side, but I'm very much in terms of the vocational education side, where environment was part of focus when sustainability was. But how do you fight against, for example, the current state government saying, well, even though it should be non-public type funding, that the education, the courses aren't there, or to give the voices because they need people to pay for them. It's sort of do you see what I'm trying to say?
I certainly heard your first part about food bank or other organisations. Yeah. I didn't quite understand the last part of the question.
Okay, the second one is your help in terms of like the lower tier of education, like a vocational or whatever. Yes. So we're working on an organisation which deals with horticulture and production horticulture. How do you help like the people in the education? Do you go into like places where you know there's people aspiring to be production to make sure they don't waste food things?
So can I paraphrase? You're asking about whether the education pitch is actually at university or is it further down into vocational and secondary and primary? Yeah. So, like, where do you pitch the education piece?
Okay, so first of all, just to answer you around Food Bank, we work in collaboration with all organisations. We are the only organisation whose goal is to put themselves out of business. Food Bank is 30 years older than OzHarvest, and they continue to make sure they get more food to feed more people. Well, if I'm still here in 35 years doing this, guys, shoot me, because I failed. So for us, it really is fundamental. We're about minimizing food waste, and we're about upskilling vulnerable people. So we have a couple of programs. So one of them is to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty. We take vulnerable youth between 15 and 25 and put them through hospitality training, offering them Cert 1 and 2, with an opportunity to get a job, to commit to supporting them through their continued learning and employment. And that, again, we offer that. Their kids do that for free, but everything about OzHarvest is philanthropically funded. We're now up to 7% government funding, and that's really goes to vehicles, because the Environment Protection Agency now is very much about giving us more vehicles, but quite honestly, that's awesome, but what I'd also really like is money to educate more people. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
The back, and then we're going to go down the front. We've got a mic.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for the great talk. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the great talk. So I was just wondering, do you target at all refugee communities, the refugees that have recently resettled, and do you also target, or do you have a way to outreach people with special needs by any chance? that can't access your supermarkets and can't approach your centres?
So Us Harvest is non-denominational, non-sectarian, and we deliver food to over 1,400 organisations of any description, which means if I have to tick a box, do you supply food to elderly, young, youth? I mean, we tick every box. So among the food that we deliver, we absolutely service refugees, all of those denominations. I'm looking at a program and would love to have a program that would engage disadvantaged, disabled people. We're opening, part of our plan is to run a catering company to disrupt the catering world a little. Any caterers in here who support me? No, we won't take away their business the same way as our supermarket is not exactly a threat for Woolworths or Coles or Aldi. One little supermarket. So we are looking at ways, but I don't currently have a program that supports disabled people.
Still here?
Hello. I was just wanting to know about your views on food wastage being a part of curriculum, as in how visible is it in what students are learning about at school? Do you think that the next generation of consumers is well versed in food wastage as a sustainability issue?
Thank you for asking me that question. So we've just piloted our FEAST program, Food Education and Sustainability Training Program, for years 5 and 6. It has national curriculum accreditation. We've piloted it in 4 schools in New South Wales. It's ready to launch. So there is no program teaching sustainability, nutrition, environmental awareness. Teachers don't have the capacity to do that work and create their own models. So it's a teach the teacher, train the trainer model. Again, we're limited by funding. We would love to roll that out nationally. The 4 schools, the principals, the teachers, we have the most extraordinary testimonials and feedback. So we can only roll out as much as we can, but we're constantly looking for funding to roll that out. I think your question is fundamental. Unless we teach kids starting young to understand their responsibility, all of our responsibility, what it takes to value food, we will never change and shift where we're at. So there's not enough being done. There are random programs. There's beautiful Stephanie Alexander program that teaches cooking here. There's all different things, but there is no national. There is now. We've had a doctorate of education working on that, but we need the capacity to roll it out. So the areas that we've targeted are education for kids, for all of us, all ages, as well as minimizing food waste and upskilling.
And lucky last.
You mentioned about the fact that you wanted 30 million from the government, you got 1, okay, but then you also said about the fact of, and the reason for that was because of the lack of political will. But then you mentioned about the fact that politicians were beginning to understand that actually their society was interested in this, which raises awareness, which gets you more money. So what I was wondering was, what's a couple of ways that you can raise the profile when you want more money from the government and you just need that thing to get politicians to realise that actually there is the political will, it is worth them doing this? What
it's called sending emails, it's sending texts, it's sending letters, and it's making our voice heard. My voice isn't enough. I need yours and yours and yours and yours and yours and yours and yours, saying we care, we have had enough, we're willing to do what it takes to stop food waste. Please help us invest in it.
So
yeah.
Set up a thing where we can all chain ourselves outside Parliament?
No, we're not going to need to do that. We're not going to need to do that because if politicians thought it was a popular issue, and I'm not saying politicians, first of all, I'm not generalizing. What I'm saying is issues that affect people, that people make a big noise about, are often the ones that get funded quicker, earlier, easier. Food waste has not been on the agenda. It is now. The ABC put on a program called War on Waste. 1 million people watched it. You are now all talking. I get so excited. I've been spending 14 years and the War on Waste happened. Yay! It's now, and I've been an overnight success.
Yeah, it's true. Overnight successes take years. I want to thank you all for your questions, and thank you, Ronni, for your answers. I know that the catering crew are quaking in their boots. I think Macca's are probably too. For being a disruptor, we thank you. For having the courage to make a career change, we thank you. For shining a light on something which is an individual issue for everybody in this room, and the differences that an individual can make in the lives of others, we thank you. And I also would like to thank the Executive Director of the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Centre. It's very hard to say when you've got Irish teeth. Jacinta Thompson and her team for their work in presenting this evening's lecture. The lecture has been videoed, including the cultural stereotypes about accents, which will no doubt be viewed time and time again. But will be placed on the Hawke Centre's website next week. And I do ask that those here tonight who are avid watchers of the Hawke Centre's website, keep your eye open for events you might want to come to for the remainder of the year. But it remains for me to thank you, Ronni, for an outstanding talk, and thank you all for joining us here tonight. Good night.